Have you ever driven a car so small and light that you felt like a stiff breeze might blow you into the next lane? Now imagine that car with a gas tank that could explode on impact. Yeah, buckle up. This is the story of Ford Pinto. I'm Eckhard Jan, and this is Error 1, the podcast where we dive into how little mistakes, overlooked warnings, and questionable decisions can turn into catastrophes. And today, we're lighting a match on one of the most infamous scandals in automotive history.
Meet the Pinto, just born.
It's the early 1970s. Bell bottoms are in, and Richard Nixon is in the White House. And American car companies are panicking. You see, Japan and Germany have been flooding the market with small and fuel-efficient cars. The kind of cars that get you from A to B without making your wallet cry at the gas pump. But Ford? They were getting left in the dust. And they needed a car, a small one, fast. But Ford was desperate, so they crunched, they shaved, they hurried. Ford, eager to catch up, launches the Pinto, a compact yet affordable car designed and produced in record time. In 1971, the Ford Pinto rolled off the assembly line. And at first, things looked good. Sales were decent, Americans liked the car, it was zippy, affordable, and honestly kind of cute. But what the public didn't know was that this rush to market would have deadly consequences. Ford sold over 3 million vehicles of their new compact car Pinto from 1971 to 1980. And then came the crashes.
To run and run and run, with little servicing, little noise, little expense. Pinto, a little carefree car to put a little kick in your life. A little better idea from Ford, coming September 11th.
To put a little kick in your life is certainly a phrase that the marketing experts of Ford did not have in mind when it came about the accidents of the Ford Pinto. And accidents they had with devastating consequences. Rear-end collisions, sometimes at speeds as low as 20 miles per hour, were turning Pintos into fireballs. But why did this happen? The answer is simple. Because it was a tiny design flaw, or maybe a massive oversight. The Ford Pinto's fuel tank design caused a problem. It was located underneath the small boot between the bumper and the rear axle. Tragically, the first fatal accidents occurred shortly after the car's launch. In rear-end collisions, the tank would break, causing the car to burn out. Drivers were unable to be rescued. Thereafter, 7 years passed. The Pinto's rear-end collisions resulted in more and more people burning to death. According to official figures, 27 people died and 120 were seriously injured. Other estimates put the number of people injured in the Ford Pinto due to the design flaw at over 500 people. A court ordered Ford to recall all Pinto vehicles and ordered all tanks to be repaired. At the time, this was the largest and most expensive recall in automotive history. In addition to the financial consequences, it was also a first-class damage to Ford's reputation. But what really had happened? How did things spiral out of control? Let's retrace the chain of errors and uncover the very first misstep, what I call the Error 1. Picture the 1960s. A decade of booming prosperity that fired up fierce competition among automakers worldwide. In America, the roads were dominated by big, heavy machines boasting hefty engine displacements. Yet in the compact car arena, two names stole the spotlight. Volkswagen with its iconic Beetle and Toyota with its up-and-coming star, the Corolla. In 1966, Toyota designed the Corolla as a car for everyone. The Corolla was considered a compact car, but had an unusually spacious feel thanks to its high roof. Within just 3 years, the Corolla was the best-selling vehicle in Japan. It was also sold more and more frequently in other countries. The Beetle from Germany was Volkswagen's best-selling car in the 60s. The Beetle was so popular in the United States that the Walt Disney Company decided to dedicate a movie to this cute little car. The movie Herbie the Love Bug was released in the United States in 1968 and was an outstanding success. Unsurprisingly, this boosted sales of the Volkswagen Beetle enormously. The Ford Motor Company had nothing comparable to offer, but the board was determined to maintain the company's place at the top of the American automotive hierarchy. And that's when Lee Iacocca, the president of the Ford Motor Company, steps in with a bold idea. The Pinto, subcompact, stylish, cheap, and fast to market. He had an extremely ambitious plan. He wanted a compact car that was light and affordable. The Pinto must not weigh more than 2,000 pounds, and it must not cost more than $2,000. But Iacocca's timetable was even more ambitious. He insisted on introducing the model faster than usually possible. Normally, development departments needed just under 4 years from conception to delivery. And here's the kicker. Iacocca allowed his team only 25 months and no longer. At the time, it was the shortest production development and implementation in automotive history. But really, that was crazy. Most cars took at least 3.5 years to develop. The developers worked hundreds of hours overtime to bring the Pinto from concept to reality. The compressed schedule meant that various aspects of production had to be carried out simultaneously. Normally, these steps would have been carried out sequentially, one after the other, but the chosen approach proved to be problematic. During the test phase, a serious design error was discovered. It was impossible to be corrected if the schedule were to stay. In the Pinto, the gas tank was mounted right behind the rear axle. Behind that, not much. Just a bit of sheet metal and not even a full rear bumper. Now, in a rear-end collision, the gas tank could be crushed against the sharp bolts from the rear differential or even punctured by the axle. Sparks, flames, and boom! And if that wasn't bad enough, the doors could jam after impact, trapping the people inside. Yeah, horror movie stuff, I tell you. Now here's where it gets really dark, because Ford knew. Internal crash tests were showing the danger early on. Engineers identified the problem. During crash tests, the engineers discovered that the tank was already damaged at low speeds and leaking gasoline. Even a small spark would be enough to start a fire. The engineers proposed numerous solutions to the problem, such as equipping the fuel tanks with additional nylon material. This would have cost $5 to $8 per vehicle, or structurally strengthening the rear. That would have cost approximately $4.20. The best solution would have been a piece of plastic that would have shielded the gas tank and prevented any kind of punctures. This solution would have cost $11 per car. Yes, that's right, $11 fixed, that's all. None of these solutions, however, were implemented. So, why didn't they do it? The vehicles were already in production, and Ford therefore had to find another solution, and the schedule was not changed. You ready for this? Instead, Iacocca instructed his engineers to carry out a cost-benefit analysis. And they did. They compared the expected cost for the changes to the fuel tank with the predicted cost after accidents and fire. They estimated how much it would cost the company if instead they had to pay for repairs, for burns, and fatalities after accidents. In a now infamous memo, Ford compared the cost of adding the fix to all 11 million cars versus the cost of paying off lawsuits from burn victims and fatalities. With over 12 million vehicles expected to be sold, the cost would have been over $130 million to fix the problem. For the other calculations, the engineers assumed that approximately 2,000 vehicles would probably go up in flames. They estimated that around 180 people would be injured and the same number would die. They calculated potential compensation of $200,000 per deceased person. In total, they came up with expected compensation payments of approximately $49 million. So, what was their conclusion? They concluded that it was cheaper to pay the settlements. On this basis, the Ford Motor Company decided not to make any changes to the faulty fuel tank. As someone said, the figures speak for themselves. The consequences for this wrong decision were fatal. In 7 years following the introduction of the Ford Pinto, Ford was confronted with over 50 lawsuits. And as lawsuits mounted, so did media scrutiny. A memo would later become Exhibit A in courtrooms and headlines across America. It was cold, calculated, and utterly scandalous. People were dying in horrible ways, and Ford had done the math and decided it was a business expense. In one of these lawsuits, a Ford engineer said under oath that about 95% of all victims would have survived if the fuel tank had been placed above the axle. As, by the way, was the case with another Ford model, the Ford Capri. In 1978, this story exploded. Pun sadly intended, when Mother Jones magazine published an exposé titled Pinto Madness. And madness it was. Ford's lawyers repeatedly defended that the Ford Pinto had met all legal standards. However, they failed to mention that Ford had successfully lobbied with extraordinary commitment and sometimes brazen lies, as was later discovered. They had ensured that a tightening of the legal limits, particularly with regard to fire protection in the event of a rear-end accident, was delayed for years. They even argued that it couldn't be their fault if accidents occurred. It was down to the roads and the drivers themselves. The trial was a turning point in American legal history. For the first time, a company was accused of reckless business practices that had led to the death of many people. The most famous case involved a crash that killed Lily Gray and seriously burned 13-year-old Richard Grimshaw. A jury sentenced the Ford Motor Company to pay $3 million to the relatives and an additional $125 million in punitive damages. Thereafter, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration eventually launched a formal investigation, and in 1978, Ford had to recall 1.5 million Pintos and Mercury Bobcats, the largest recall in automotive history at the time. But the damage was done, not just to the victims and their families, but to Ford's reputation and to the public trust. So, what was the Era 1? It all started with the decision to develop the Pinto in half the time that was normally required. With this rigid specification, the design error could not be recognized earlier, and then it was already too late to keep the schedule. By this point, at the latest, the Ford Motor Company president Lee Iacocca should have hit the brakes. The Pinto case became a landmark in product liability law. It increased chilling questions about corporate ethics. What's a human life worth? What corners are companies willing to cut when they are racing the clock and the competition? And how do you weigh $11 against someone burning alive in a car? The Ford Pinto became a negative symbol for the greed and ruthless behavior of American corporations. Incidentally, it became known during the court cases what Lee Iacocca's attitude to the subject was. An engineer testified that when asked about vehicle safety, his boss replied, "Safety doesn't sell." How wrong he was. Competitors Toyota and Volkswagen ultimately even profited from the scandal surrounding the Ford Pinto. They sold more compact cars than ever before. Ultimately, this scandal had later a positive effect on the industry as it led to safety standards being improved and forced companies to take greater care of drivers' protection. It's easy to point fingers, but the Pinto wasn't just about evil executives or one bad decision. It was about culture, one where speed and cost mattered more than caution, where risks were acceptable until they were public. And it's a reminder that even small design flaws, rushed deadlines, and ignored warnings can quite literally be explosive. Thanks for riding along on this explosive journey. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with someone who loves cars or scandals or both. And remember, the devil's in the details, especially the $11 ones. I'm Eckhard Jan, and this was Era 1. If you want to learn more about this concept, you can now download my award-winning book, Era 1, or just visit www.era1.net. With this in mind, I say thank you very much, as we say in Germany, bleiben Sie sicher, stay safe, and maybe avoid rear-ending a Pinto.